Your life's greatest victories are often born in moments no one witnessed. The medal ceremonies, the applause, the recognition, these are merely echoes of battles won in private. Your transformation happens in empty rooms, on solitary walks, during quiet mornings when the world still sleeps. There exists a profound difference between loneliness and purposeful solitude. Loneliness drains your spirit. It's the painful awareness of disconnection, the ache for company. But solitude fills you. It's the intentional choice to stand apart, not because you have no one, but because you understand the power of being alone. Most people fear this aloneness. They fill every moment with noise, faces, and voices. Their phones buzz constantly. Their calendars overflow. They surround themselves with people who neither challenge nor truly know them. What does this cost? Everything that matters, their authenticity, clarity, and perfect truth, remains hidden from those who never step away. True strength develops in private before it ever manifests in public. The champion's discipline forms in pre-dawn training sessions. The visionary's ideas crystallize during midnight contemplation. The eater's conviction solidifies during solitary reflection. What people eventually admire publicly was forged privately. History confirms this pattern. Abraham Lincoln retreated to quiet spaces to wrestle with decisions that would reshape a nation. Mother Teresa spent hours alone in prayer before serving the abandoned. Nelson Mandela emerged from isolated imprisonment with wisdom that transcended hatred. Marie Curie made groundbreaking discoveries working alone in her laboratory while others slept. Einstein walked solitary paths while reimagining the universe. These giants understood what most miss: that external voices, however well-intentioned, often drown the whispers of your deepest wisdom. They recognize that isolation isn't a punishment but preparation. They embrace solitude, not as deprivation, but as a crucible where greatness for your power awaits in similar spaces. Not in constant connection, but in strategic disconnection. Not in endless accessibility, but in deliberate unavailability. Not in the comfort of the crowd, but in the courage to stand apart. The path to your most powerful self runs straight through territories of solitude. The question isn't whether you'll be alone. Life guarantees such moments. The question is whether you'll recognize these moments as your greatest opportunity. Social connection serves a vital purpose in human existence, yet constant immersion in others' presence creates an invisible barrier to self-knowledge. Like a mirror reflecting only external light, your identity becomes shaped by reactions, expectations, and perceptions of those around you. You that exists in social spaces often wears masks, sometimes so convincingly that you forget they're there. The social noise drowns your authentic voice, the opinions that aren't truly yours, the values adopted without examination, the goals pursued to impress others rather than fulfill your purpose, the personality traits exaggerated or diminished to fit in. All these create a version of yourself that may succeed in gaining approval but fails at achieving fulfillment. True clarity emerges when external voices fade. In solitude, you begin to distinguish between what you've absorbed and what genuinely resonates within you. Questions surface. What do I actually believe? What would I pursue if no one was watching? What brings me joy, regardless of recognition? What matters most when status and approval aren't factors? The answers reveal your authentic self. This self-discovery forms the foundation for genuine leadership. You cannot guide others with conviction until you know your own path. You cannot inspire authenticity while living inauthentically. You cannot offer your unique contribution while copying others. The leader who hasn't faced themselves in solitude becomes merely an echo of louder voices, a reflection rather than a light. The courage required for this honest self-examination exceeds what most battlefield bravery demands. Facing yourself without distractions means acknowledging uncomfortable truths, your insecurities, your weaknesses, your mistakes, your unfulfilled potential. It means questioning assumptions that have shaped your life. It means recognizing where you've compromised your integrity. In these moments of brutal honesty, you'll likely discover aspects of yourself that surprise you, strengths unrecognized, convictions untested, creativity unexpressed. You'll find passions buried under practicality, talents hidden beneath self-doubt, and wisdom clouded by information overload. This process reveals the difference between your authentic self and your conditioned self. The authentic self speaks with quiet certainty about your purpose. The conditioned self repeats what you've been told you should want. The authentic self knows your unique contribution. The conditioned self focuses on competition and comparison. The authentic self recognizes your intrinsic value. The conditioned self seeks validation. Ultimately, this journey towards self-discovery requires regular periods of intentional solitude, not isolation from humanity, but strategic separation to hear yourself think. Not permanent withdrawal, but purposeful retreat to reconnect with your, not rejection of community, but the recognition that you bring more to your relationships when you first become acquainted with yourself. The person who emerges from this process possesses self-knowledge that runs deeper than surface identity, decision-making untethered from social approval, and purpose anchored in personal truth rather than cultural expectations. When you consistently rely on others for support, validation, and direction, you develop a dangerous dependency. Like muscles that atrophy without use, your inner resources weaken when outsourced. Intentional alone time forces self-reliance, building the strength to stand unsupported when necessary. Mental toughness. That resilient quality, admired in champions, isn't forged in comfortable conditions among supportive crowds. It develops when you face challenges without immediate assistance, when you solve your own problems, when you push through resistance without external encouragement, when you continue despite doubt with no one watching to acknowledge your effort. Solitude creates these perfect training conditions. Emotional independence represents perhaps life's greatest superpower. The ability to regulate your own emotional state rather than depending on others' approval or presence grants unmatched freedom. Those who master this skill maintain stability regardless of circumstances. They find joy without permission. They recover from setbacks without requiring rescue. They navigate uncertainty without constant reassurance. This independence emerges from creating your own validation system. Instead of measuring success through others' reactions, you develop personal standards. You learn to recognize your progress without applause. You acknowledge your efforts without praise. You celebrate victories others might not even notice. Your worth becomes self-determined rather than externally assigned. This internal strength foundation builds remarkable resilience against criticism. When your sense of value comes from within, others' opinions lose their devastating power. Negative feedback becomes information rather than identity threat. Rejection becomes redirection rather than definition. Disapproval becomes a difference in perspective rather than a judgment of worth. The person who fears being alone has unconsciously admitted their dependence on external sources for what should be internally generates confidence, direction, motivation, and worth. They have outsourced their power to sources they cannot control. Contrast this with those who regularly embrace solitude. They've learned to produce their own energy rather than draw from others. They've developed the ability to encourage themselves through difficulty. They practice making decisions based on inner wisdom rather than outer influence. They've built the capacity to face hard truths without flinching. This internal strength doesn't develop instantly, but accumulates through consistent practice. Each time you sit with uncomfortable emotions rather than seeking distraction. Each time you solve a problem through your own resourcefulness. Each time you maintain your standards without accountability partners. Each time you motivate yourself when enthusiasm wanes. For those most comfortable alone are often most formidable together. Their relationships aren't based on need but choice. Their contributions come from fullness rather than emptiness. Their leadership emerges from inner conviction rather than outer validation. The greatest power lies not in constant connection, but in the strength developed during strategic disconnection. Not in perpetual support, but in regular self-reliance. Not in external validation, but in internal security that remains unshaken when you stand completely alone. Your most original and powerful ideas rarely emerge in meetings, group sessions, or crowded spaces. They arise when your mind wanders free without interruption. Solitude creates this essential open territory where thoughts combine in unexpected. Acquire your environment, the louder your creativity speaks. Creating space means eliminating the constant input that floods your thinking. The notifications, the conversations, the media consumption, all valuable, yet all potential barriers to original thought. In their absence, your mind naturally fills the vacuum with something uniquely yours. The ideas that emerge aren't echoes of others, but expressions of your distinctive perspective. Problem-solving transforms in isolation. When facing challenges alongside others, you naturally gravitate toward consensus thinking and familiar approaches. Alone, you're free to consider unconventional angles, bizarre possibilities. You bypass the social pressure to appear logical and practical, allowing your mind to explore pathways others wouldn't consider. Innovation requires separation from group thinking precisely because true breakthroughs initially appear strange, impractical, or even wrong to the majority. History's most transformative ideas were almost universally rejected at first. Solitude provides protection for fragile new concepts before they're strong enough to withstand external judgment and comparison to existing models. Try these practical exercises to spark creativity in your own time. First, dedicate 20 minutes to writing without stopping or editing. Let thoughts flow regardless of quality. Second, take ordinary objects and list 20 unusual uses, stretching beyond obvious functions. Third, choose a problem and deliberately invert common assumptions about it, asking what if the opposite were true? Fourth, impose artificial constraints on challenges. Asking how you'd solve something with severe limitations often produces surprising innovations. Fifth, practice combinatory play. Deliberately connecting unrelated concepts, industries, or ideas to see what emerges from these unexpected intersections. The creative giants throughout history, from Einstein and Picasso, from Marie Curie to Mozart, all emphasized solitude as essential to their work. Not because they were antisocial, but because they understood that groundbreaking ideas require conditions that only solitude provides. Freedom from comparison, space for deep concentration, and room for intuitive connections to form without premature evaluation. Your creative potential remains largely untapped until you create regular protected periods of productive solitude, not isolation from inspiration, but insulation from interruption. Not permanent withdrawal, but strategic retreat. Not rejection of others as ideas, but space to develop your own before seeking input. This balance between connection and solitude, between input and output, between consumption and creation, unlocks your fullest creative capacity and ensures what you produce carries your unique signature rather than merely reflecting your influences. Every powerful public contribution has a hidden backstory, a season of private preparation that most never witness. Look closely at any seemingly overnight success, and you'll find years of unseen development. The master of a performance represents thousands of practice hours when no audience applauded. The breakthrough business followed countless failed attempts in obscurity. The impactful leadership emerged from extended periods of learning and growth away from recognition. Your vision requires this same private development before public expression. Like a seed that must establish roots underground before producing visible fruit, your greatest ideas need protection during their vulnerable early stages. Premature exposure criticism can destroy potential before it matures. Solitude provides the protective environment where your vision grows strong enough to withstand eventual challenges. Building skills demands consistency, especially when no external recognition exists. The craftsman who perfects his technique while unknown. The writer who fills journals no one reads. The entrepreneur who refines business models before securing funding. A speaker who practices presentations to empty rooms. These private investments yield eventual public dividends that appear miraculous to those who never witnessed the preparation. This preparation phase tests your patience more than any other life challenge. Modern culture conditions you to expect immediate results, constant feedback, and regular affirmation. Progress without witnesses feels suspiciously like stagnation. Improvement without metrics seems questionably real. Growth without acknowledgement tests your commitment to mastery for its own sake rather than for recognition. Yet this isolation specifically refines and clarifies your purpose. Without constant external input reshaping your direction, your authentic path emerges more clearly. Without premature implementation, forcing commitment to undeveloped ideas, your vision evolves naturally toward its strongest form. Without the pressure to produce immediate results, you develop foundations that support sustainable impact rather than temporary success. Examine the life patterns of any person whose contributions transform their field. Moses spent 40 years in desert obscurity before leading a nation. Paul disappeared into Arabia for 3 years before beginning his impactful ministry. Einstein worked as an unknown patent clerk while developing revolutionary theories. J.K. Rowling wrote obscurity while envisioning the Harry Potter series. Their impact came precisely because they embraced seasons of preparation when no one was watching. This pattern remains consistent across domains. Those who change worlds first change themselves. Those who lead movements first establish unshakable personal foundations. Those who create lasting value first develop skills worth. And this development happens primarily in periods of purposeful solitude. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows where transformation occurs without audience. Your current season of unrecognized preparation isn't punishment or failure. It's the necessary precursor to meaningful impact. The depth of your future influence directly correlates with the depth of your present development. The breadth of your eventual reach depends on the breadth of your current growth. The durability of your coming contribution relies on the strength of foundation being built now, alone, away from applause or acknowledgement. We embrace this solitary preparation not as delay, but as essential investment. Not as withholding of opportunity, but as development of capacity. Not as denial of your gifts, but as refinement of your offering. When your moment arrives, you'll understand why the preparation couldn't be shortened without diminishing the impact. When the healthiest connections paradoxically require healthy independence. Many relationships suffer not from lack of togetherness, but from lack of separate. When two people depend entirely on each other for emotional stability, identity, and purpose, they create not intimacy, but codependence. A mutual imprisonment disguised as closeness. Freedom from neediness transforms your relationships completely. When you approach others from wholeness rather than emptiness, you connect for different reasons. Not to fill voids, validate worth, or relieve loneliness, but to share strengths, exchange insights, and create mutual growth. You bring energy rather than drain it. You enhance lives rather than burden them. This creates a powerful paradigm. Intentional solitude actually improves your social connections. By developing comfort with yourself, you become more comfortable with others. By addressing your own emotional needs, you stop unconsciously demanding others meet them. By establishing your identity independently, you interact authentically rather than adaptively. By finding your own purpose, you complement others rather than compete with them. Setting boundaries that protect your alone time requires courage in a culture that equates constant availability with caring. Yet these boundaries create the space where you recharge, reflect, and return to relationships refreshed. Without them, you bring depleted versions of yourself to the people you value most. With them, you offer the gift of your fullest presence during shared time. Your self-sufficiency naturally attracts high-quality relationships. When needing nothing, you choose connections based on genuine compatibility rather than convenience or desperation. You remain selective about who receives your energy. You recognize toxic dynamics quickly because they contrast sharply with your internal harmony. You walk away from damaging situations because being alone feels comfortable rather than frightening. The person comfortable alone possesses relationship advantages others lack. They listen fully without anxious self-focus. They express needs clearly without manipulation. They maintain perspective during conflicts without catastrophizing. They give freely without scorekeeping. They celebrate others' success without comparison. They share vulnerability without dependency. These qualities emerge from regular time spent in self-connection, not in isolation from humanity, but in intentional periods of reflection that strengthen rather than weaken your capacity for meaningful bonds, not in rejection of community, but in development of internal resources that enhance what you bring to it. Those most capable of being alone build the strongest connections with others, not despite their independence, but because of it, not by sacrificing autonomy, but by developing it alongside intimacy. Not by diminishing boundaries, but by establishing healthy ones that protect the best parts of themselves for sharing. Your relationships remain only as healthy as your relationship with yourself. Invest accordingly. Every significant choice you make faces powerful external pressures, family expectations, cultural norms, peer influence, expert opinions, media messaging. Without intentional separation, these forces shape your decisions almost invisibly. Solitude creates the necessary distance to recognize these influences and evaluate them consciously rather than unconsciously adopting them. And the intuition, that quiet internal guidance system, speaks most clearly in moments of quiet. In constant stimulation and conversation, its subtle signals get overwhelmed by louder voices to the gut feeling, the persistent thought, the unexpected clarity. These often emerge not during endless discussion, but during silent reflection, when external input pauses long enough for internal wisdom to surface. Strategic thinking requires isolation precisely because strategy development demands perspective that proximity prohibits. Like trying to see an entire mountain while standing on its slopes, you cannot perceive the complete pattern of your life while immersed in its details. Stepping away creates the necessary vantage point to see connections, recognize patterns, and identify the wisest path forward through complexity. The most challenging yet crucial discernment involves distinguishing between others' expectations and your true path. What appears as your own desire often reveals itself in solitude as merely an internalized expectation, mere chosen to please parents. The lifestyle maintained to impress peers. The goals pursued to meet cultural definitions of success. Only in honest solitude do these adopted purposes separate from authentic Friday. This practical framework for solitary decision making first, facing you without immediate judgment of options. Second, list all external influences affecting your thinking, whose voices, values, and expectations are present. Third, imagine making each possible choice and sit with the physical and emotional response each produces. Fourth, project forward 5 years and envision living with each outcome. Finally, articulate your decision as if explaining it to someone who loves you unconditionally. This process works specifically because it happens away from immediate social reinforcement. Not because others have nothing valuable to contribute, but because their contribution becomes most useful after you've established your own perspective rather than before. Not because external input lacks value, but because that value diminishes when it drowns out your internal guidance. The clarity that emerges from this solitary reflection transforms your decision-making from reactive to proactive, from influence to intentional, from externally driven to internally aligned. Not by rejecting wise counsel, but by creating space to recognize which counsel actually serves your highest good versus which simply perpetuates existing patterns. Most people feel immediate discomfort in quietness. They reach for phones, turn on background noise, or fill the emptiness with words. This instinctive avoidance reveals our collective unease with silence, yet comfort with quietness marks those who access deeper wisdom and strength. Learning to sit peacefully in silence requires practice. Start with just 5 minutes daily of complete quiet, no music, no voices, no digital distractions. Notice your impulse to escape this stillness. Preserve the thoughts that rush to fill the void. Each time you resist the urge to end this discomfort, your capacity expands. Like training any muscle, consistency builds strength until what once felt unbearable becomes refreshing. Meditation and mindfulness serve as structured approaches to this strength building. These practices train your attention not to frantically seek stimulation, but to rest in awareness not to fill empty spaces, but to appreciate them, not to avoid uncomfortable feeling, but to observe them without immediate reaction. This discipline develops inner resources that remain inaccessible to those constantly surrounded by noise. Silence allows you to hear subtle signals typically drowned by constant stimulation. The physical sensations indicating stress before it becomes overwhelming. The quiet doubts about decisions that deserve reconsideration. The gentle nudges toward opportunities you might otherwise miss. The warning signs of relationships or situations that drain your energy. These valuable insights speak in whispers, not shouts. Healing occurs most profoundly in stillness. The constant noise and activity of modern life keep wounds covered but unhealed, like continuing to walk on an injured leg rather than allowing recovery through rest. Emotional healing similarly requires periods when the nervous system can fully settle, when defenses can temporarily lower, when you can process experiences without immediately accumulating new ones. This is the wisdom available in quiet moments, differs qualitatively from knowledge gained through external sources. Not facts and information, but understanding and insight. Not tactical knowledge, but strategic wisdom. Not what works for others, but what resonates with your deepest truth. This wisdom emerges not through seeking, but through allowing, creating space for inner knowing to surface naturally. Your power grows in these silent moments. Not through striving, but through settling. Not through accumulation, but through simplification. Not through conquest, but through connection with your own depths. Creating deliberate solitude in today's hyper-connected world requires intention and strategy. Without both, external demands will consistently override your need for reflective isolation. Start by identifying specific time blocks. Even if it's 15 minutes daily, that become non-negotiable appointments with yourself. Protect these periods with the same commitment you give to important meetings with others. Design daily rituals that anchor your solitude practice. The morning pages written before others wake. The evening walk without your phone. The lunch break spent in a quiet corner rather than a crowded break room. These small, consistent investments yield disproportionate returns in clarity and strength. Quickly, solitude requires more substantial boundaries. Perhaps Sunday afternoons become technology-free zones. Maybe Wednesday evenings are reserved for solo activities that replenish your energy. Possibly Saturday mornings are dedicated to reflection on the week's lessons before planning the next. Whatever the pattern, communicate these boundaries clearly to others in your life. Monthly retreats, even brief ones, provide deeper restoration. A day spent hiking alone. An overnight stay somewhere without your usual responsibilities. A weekend dedicated to a creative project without interruption. These extended periods of solitude allow insights that require more space to emerge fully. And boundaries. With technology may represent your greatest challenge and opportunity. Consider establishing phone-free zones in your home. Create digital sunset rituals where screens power down at specific times. Use airplane mode strategically. Delete apps that constantly pull your attention. Disable notifications that fragment your focus. Each boundary creates space where your authentic self can breathe. Similarly, boundaries with people require clear, kind communication. Explain that your need for solitude isn't rejection but self-care that ultimately benefits your relationships. Teach others to respect your reflective space by consistently protecting it yourself. Demonstrate through results. Increase patience, better listening, more thoughtful responses, the value your alone time creates for everyone. Physical spaces that nurture independence might include a corner chair designated for reading and reflection, a garden spot where interruptions aren't welcome, a local cafe where you regularly spend time in your own company, a path you walk alone to clear your mind. These environments become anchors for your practice, triggering the mental shift from external focus to internal awareness. Start implementing solitude today, regardless of circumstances. If privacy seems impossible, wake earlier than others. If quiet spaces don't exist, use noise-canceling headphones. If free time feels non-existent, examine your calendar for activities that could be eliminated or delegated. If family demands seem overwhelming, negotiate short periods where others take responsibility so you can step away. That's the most powerful implementation strategy remains consistency over intensity. 5 minutes daily creates more lasting change than 5 hours monthly. Small, regular withdrawals from social immersion build the muscle of self-reliance more effectively than occasional extended isolation. Begin where you are with what you have and gradually expand as you experience the benefits. Breaking dependency on external approval liberates you from humanity's most common prison. Most people live in constant service to opinions they cannot control, adjusting their words, modifying their appearance, altering their goals, and hiding their truth to earn temporary validation. This exhausting performance builds a life not truly their own. Finding genuine contentment in your own company represents the ultimate test of self-acceptance. When you enjoy solitude without needing to escape it, you've discovered something rare. The ability to be fully present with yourself without judgment, not filling time with distractions to avoid uncomfortable thoughts, not seeking constant stimulation to escape underlying dissatisfaction, not requiring others' presence to feel complete. This self-sufficiency radiates a confidence others instinctively recognize and respect. Not arrogance built on comparison, but assurance rooted in self-knowledge. Not inflexibility that refuses input, but certainty that evaluates suggestions without being controlled by them. Not isolation that rejects connection, but independence that enhances it. This quiet strength draws others toward you while simultaneously freeing you from needing their approach. Leadership emerges naturally from this capacity to stand alone when necessary. The most effective leaders make decisions others temporarily reject, hold values others initially question, and pursue visions others don't yet see. This requires comfort with disapproval, disagreement, and doubt from even trusted voices. Without the ability to maintain conviction and solitude, leadership inevitably compromises to maintain consensus. The ultimate freedom comes from living without fear of rejection or abandonment. Most human behavior stems from two primal fears: being cast out of the tribe, rejection, or being left behind, abandonment. These ancient survival threats no longer threaten physical death, but still dictate emotional lives. The person comfortable alone has discovered these fears lose their power when solitude becomes not punishment, but preference. His freedom doesn't advocate permanent isolation, but creates the foundation for authentic connection. Not retreating from humanity, but engaging from wholeness rather than lack. Not avoiding vulnerability, but sharing from strength rather than desperation. Not rejecting community, but contributing unique value to it because you've discovered what you alone can offer. You're jumping toward freedoms. Who am I when no one is watching? The answer reveals both your current reality and your potential path. The gap between who you present publicly and who you are privately shows exactly where work remains. The distance between the role you play and the person you are indicates the freedom still